Welfare Wednesday webinar. And I'm delighted that we've got people joining us both on Zoom and also YouTube Live. You're very welcome to this 68th World Horse Welfare Wednesday webinar, where the focus is equine behaviour, carrot or stick, applying learning theory to riding our horses. Now, if you joined us before, you'll know the form, but the best way to get involved, if you're registered on Zoom, you'll be able to get into the poll question, which we're going to ask shortly, and all of the question and answers. If you can put in Zoom, use the Q&A tab to put your questions in. And remember, when the questions go in there, if you see one you like, you can always upvote it. And if you're watching on YouTube Live, if you just put those questions in the comment section, we'll move them across. And of course, you can always register for our YouTube education channel, and we'll put the link up for signing up there, because all 68 of our webinars, it's an extraordinary number since we started these in the dark days of the pandemic in 2020 and running all the way through to 2025. We're going to take a short break over the summer, and we'll be back in the autumn of 2025 for our 6th series, where we'll break into the 70s and beyond. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Trudi Dempsey and Justine Harrison. As I mentioned, applying learning theory to riding our horses. And what the format is going to be, Trudy's going to speak to us for about half an hour. Then Justine will join the discussion panel. We'll initially have a few structured questions, but then it's very much over to all of you to ask those questions. And we'll get through as many of those questions as we can. Now, this might be the last webinar in this series, but we will be looking to start a series again in November. So please, always, at any time, if any thought comes to you, say, it would be lovely if World Horse Welfare covered this subject, then email us on education@worldhorsewelfare.org. Now, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And so that's where we are, the carrot or stick, applying learning theory to riding horses. And before I introduce Trudi, we just thought we'd get involved in a very simple poll question. Do you use positive reinforcement when riding your horses? Yes, no, or I'm not sure. So whilst you're answering that question, I'm going to introduce Trudi, who is a hugely experienced equine behavioural consultant. I mean, very much a practitioner, a trainer who's had a lifetime of experience, as you can see on the slide here. The IAABC is the International Association of Animal Behaviour Consultants, and the ABTC is the Animal Behaviour and Training Council. And I think it's really noteworthy at the bottom there, where that sort of peer review evidence to make sure we really are following what the science, as far as possible, is telling us, is that Trudi is involved in the International Association of Behavioural Consultants Foundation's peer-reviewed journal, and I think that is so important for us. So before I hand over to Judy, I just, you always know I love that quirky fact about someone, and Trudi is certainly batting strong, because her quirky fact is that she didn't always used to be an equine behaviourist. She used to be an air stewardess and served numerous celebrities, including, listen to this, Elizabeth Taylor and Elvis Costello. Now that's pretty strong as far as I'm concerned, and I'd love to know if she had any proper conversations with any of those celebrities. So before I hand over to Trudi, Basil, are you going to give us the answer to our quick poll question? Well, look at that. 84% of you are saying yes, but a good number, over 10%, saying I'm not so sure. So you are definitely in the right place, because I very much hope that 12% can be reduced to 0 by the end of today's webinar. So without that, Trudi, it's a real joy to have you. I think is it the first time you've joined us?
It is, yes.
It's the first time. And so it's a real privilege to be able to introduce you, and over to you.
Thanks, Rolly. I'll just share my...
Looking good.
Okay, so everyone should be able to see my slide.
That's looking good.
Well, thanks, Rolly, and thanks everyone who's attending the webinar. A massive thank you, obviously, to World Horse Welfare, not just for inviting me, but for looking at such diverse topics in their winter webinar series over the years. Now, while the horse world might not yet be ready to completely abandon traditional methods, although I'm heartened by the poll results there, so I may be preaching a little to the choir in this presentation. But I think we can still push for progress. Just as the zoo world once believed that animals couldn't be managed without force, we now know that all species, including horses, can be trained effectively using ethical methods. Our challenge is not just proving that it works, but making it practical and accessible for everyone working with horses. So I slightly tweaked the title here and I've moved it to Beyond Carrots and Sticks, because I think we have moved beyond them. Let's start with the simple notion: what you get is what you teach. I don't know about you, but I've often followed down a narrow country lane behind a couple of riders, and perhaps noticing one of them with their legs constantly bumping against the horse's side just to keep the horse walking. Instead of that light leg cue meaning go, the horse has learned something entirely different. Basically, I only go when the leg keeps bumping. When you stop bumping, then the horse stops or slows down. Of course, this wasn't the rider's intention, but it's a perfect example of how our horses learn exactly what we teach them, whether we mean to or not. If we want clear, responsive communication, we need to understand how learning theory really works. And that's basically what I want to explore today. Learning is just how horses adapt to their experiences, figuring out what works and what doesn't. Every interaction shapes their understanding of the world, including how they respond to us. Behaviour is simply what we can see a horse doing, whether it's flicking an ear, shifting their weight, or performing a walk transition. It's their way of communicating, reacting, and navigating their environment. By paying attention to these responses, we can become better trainers and clearer communicators. Horses are constantly learning from the outcomes of their actions. It's how they survive. If there's a loud bang and they run, they've just reinforced their own behaviour by staying safe and will run away from something similar in future. Learning theory helps us understand these connections between actions and outcomes. It's not about blaming ourselves when things don't go to plan. It's more about recognizing how learning happens so that we can teach the right things on purpose and stop teaching the wrong things by accident. So if your horse seems to do it their way, the real question might be, what have they learned from you or the environment? I've just explained how horses are hardwired to learn from consequences. So now let's look at how that applies to training. Operant learning happens when a horse changes their behaviour based on what follows. If a behaviour leads to something they want, they'll do it more, just like we would. If it leads to something they'd rather avoid, then they're going to do it less. This is the foundation of all training, whether we're shaping movements under saddle, teaching on the ground, or unintentionally reinforcing habits we don't want. Every response we get from a horse follows a simple pattern. Lucky for us, we have a nifty ABC that fits. Something happens before the behaviour. We call that the antecedent A. The horse does something, that's the behaviour B, and then something happens after, which is the consequence C. In riding, we often refer to the antecedent as a cue or an aid, but it's the consequence that follows that truly shapes the behaviour that went before it. Understanding this helps us train more effectively by reinforcing the behaviours we want more of. I'm going to delve just a little deeper into the operant side of learning theory so that we're all on the same page for this webinar. But for more on operant conditioning and learning theory, you could seek out Gemma Pearson's World Horse Welfare Wednesday webinars on the topic. At the heart of all behaviour creation is motivation. That's the driving force that encourages a horse to offer a certain behaviour. This motivation is influenced by the consequences they've experienced in the past. To understand how behaviour is shaped, we look at a framework involving reinforcement and punishment. But for now, just keep in mind that motivation is the key to why a horse offers the behaviours they do. At its core, learning happens through reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement increases the likelihood of a behaviour happening again, while punishment decreases it. The key is in the consequences. What follows a behaviour determines whether it strengthens or weakens. You might already be familiar, and with that 82% in the poll, I'm going to guess pretty much most of you are familiar with the traditional 4 quadrants way of representing operant conditioning. We have positive reinforcement, R+, negative reinforcement, R-, positive punishment, P+, and negative punishment, P-. These are often represented as distinct categories in a pie chart, like the one in the left corner there, with each one representing a different way of influencing behaviour through the consequences that follow. But for me, rather than seeing them as separate, I tend to think of them as doors into the same room. They all lead to behaviour change, but each door is distinct. These processes are way more interconnected than we often give them credit for. We learn them as being very discrete and separate, but that's not the real world. By viewing them as part of a bigger picture, we can become more flexible in our approach and better understand how to motivate horses in a way that makes sense for them. I'll briefly look what's behind each door in the following slides. If we want to use positive reinforcement, we add something the horse finds rewarding, like food or scratches. This encourages the horse to repeat the behaviour because it results in something pleasant. It's a great tool for strengthening desired behaviours, especially when we want to build new skills or maintain existing ones. The key here is that the horse does something and the consequence is something they enjoy. So they're motivated to do it again. In negative reinforcement, we remove something unpleasant to encourage a behaviour. For example, releasing pressure when the horse moves in the right direction. The horse learns that their behaviour makes the pressure go away, so they're likely to repeat the behaviour when the pressure is used in future. This process relies on avoiding or escaping something uncomfortable to motivate the horse to respond in future. In scientific terms, R+ and R- aren't about good or bad. They're about addition and subtraction. R+ adds something desirable to encourage behaviour, while R- removes pressure to reinforce it. It's not about judgment, it's about the effect the consequence has on the behaviour. Positive punishment involves adding something unpleasant after a behaviour to decrease it occurring. For example, a correction with a whip to stop an undesired behaviour. It's about discouraging the horse from repeating the behaviour by adding something unpleasant. Punishment can reduce and sometimes will suppress behaviour if it's unpleasant enough and perfectly timed. In horse training, it often fails because achieving that precision is difficult and it risks creating unintended, unpleasant associations. For that reason, I don't support the intentional use of punishment. In negative punishment, we take away something that the horse desires to decrease the behaviour. For example, removing attention or withholding food when the horse does something we don't want, like pawing. By removing something the horse values, they're less likely to engage in that behaviour again. This technique works by taking away the opportunity for reinforcement. I don't support the use of this kind of intentional punishment either. Although when positive reinforcement-based training was first introduced with horses, it was seen as much more of an option. But modern clicker trainers don't rely on it and have much more creative ways of improving behaviour that they don't want to see. So in practice, we have this big, soupy mess. Training isn't neatly divided into those 4 single quadrants. We might be aiming for one or the other, but it doesn't always mean we can reduce it into those individuals. Even if our goal is to use positive reinforcement, other elements like the removal of pressure, negative reinforcement, or the removal of the opportunity to earn reinforcement, negative punishment, can slip in. For those who are deeply interested in this, and I'm hoping from the 82%, that's quite a lot of you tonight, I'd suggest what truly matters is recognising the full picture of what's at play, understanding how each piece might interact and ensuring our choices align always with our intentions for the horse. Now, outside of those geekier trainers, I think it's completely fine to just accept the soup and try your best to be kind and effective as a trainer. One thing worth briefly mentioning is something termed extinction, which can result in frustration due to unclear communication with the trainer. It is way beyond the remit of a 30-minute webinar, unfortunately, but I didn't want to neglect mentioning that the potential for extinction and discomfort in training can lurk around even positive reinforcement-based training. I want to be clear, and I've already said I don't use or condone intentional punishment. I use that word intentional on purpose, very intentionally, because things can slip in when we don't intend them. But I never am going to write a protocol intending to use punishment in my training, except in genuine emergencies where safety, either the horse or the humans, is at risk. There are lots more imaginative ways to change behaviour with much less fallout for the horse. Punishment is tricky. For it to be effective, it must meet several conditions. Timing is critical, as is consistency. For punishment to work, as operant conditioning, the science behind it suggests, it has to conform to those conditions. Even when they're met, the horse must clearly connect the action that they offered to the consequence that follows, and that's not always that straightforward. Beyond these difficulties, punishment carries unintended side effects. Instead of changing the behaviour itself, the horse may focus on escaping or avoiding the situation altogether. If a horse is punished for standing still at the mounting block, they may start walking off as soon as they see the rider approach or the tack approach. Stopping a behaviour in the moment doesn't mean resolving it. Without an alternative being taught, the horse is just left guessing what to do instead. In some cases, punishment can lead to the wrong associations, with the horse linking it to you, the handler, or the rider, the environment, or something totally unrelated. And I'm sure you can think of situations in the human world where that's been the case for you. When we step back and look at the bigger picture, I think it's clear that punishment doesn't teach the horse what to do. It simply tries to stop them doing what we don't want them to do in that moment. For example, hitting a horse in front of a fence is highly unlikely to prevent the horse stopping in future, and it certainly doesn't teach them how to approach a fence properly. So hitting a horse after they stop in front of the fence is unlikely to work because the punishment often comes too late and the horse doesn't connect it in its brain with stopping at the fence. Many training issues arise not because a horse is unwilling, and people are always a bit nonplussed when I say this, because genuinely horses who are not in pain or are in some fearful situation are generally so willing. So if we're starting to think it's because a horse is unwilling, that they can't offer a behaviour, I think we need to dig down a bit more. So before we begin training, we must consider always potential for pain, confusion, fear, or just living an unsuitable lifestyle. All of these things make such a difference to our horses' lives, and of course, they can stop learning happening. So before we focus on any kind of reinforcement, we need to address those underlying factors. When we're using negative reinforcement effectively, but without escalation. So by escalation, I mean I've heard people in the past in my dressage background say, you ask gently, you ask a little harder with the leg, and then you really get some welly behind it. That is escalation, going from light to heavier. I don't think that that's a good idea. We can be way more creative in producing behaviour. If we insist on using negative reinforcement, then we can do it well. Thinking about the antecedent, the way we set up that behaviour, is key, as I've written up here on this slide. The cue or aid should be light. You should be able to repeat it. So it's no good forgetting what your cues are. I often have clients who will use several different cues for walking on, things like, come on then, or are you ready? When really they have a perfectly good walk on cue. The cue should be, or the aid should be non-conflicting. So we're not talking hands versus legs and the two coming together. And no cue or aid should ever be constant. Light pressure should serve as a signal, not a force. Hence the need to avoid that escalation to bigger and bigger cues. The behaviour itself must be recognised and shaped thoughtfully. Of course, we might see only a tiny bit of the behaviour at the beginning, so we need to reward the smallest effort and acknowledge the try and build towards refinement through repetition. Most importantly, the consequence, and this has to be clear and immediate. Remember, in negative reinforcement, the release is the reinforcement. A well-timed release will communicate success to the horse, making that process a lot smoother, and everything's a lot more predictable and effective, and you don't have to escalate it. Take the common example of using leg pressure to ask a horse to move forwards. If the pressure stays on constantly, the horse may learn that the cue isn't the initial leg aid, but rather that constant bump that I mentioned right at the beginning. Instead, if the leg is applied lightly and released the moment the horse responds, they learn that the correct response is moving forward promptly, not waiting for stronger pressure. By keeping your cues light, clear, and repeatable, you can avoid escalation while making the lesson easier for the horse to understand. The take home here is in the release. In this very short clip, I'm using what look like typical pressure and release cues. I'm making them look super obvious to illustrate the point. I don't ride like this most of the time, I promise. The horse responds to the cue of either my hands on the reins or my legs on their side, and I release. And you can see there that there was no conflict. My hands weren't asking backwards with the reins at the time I applied the leg cue. And interestingly, I actually taught those cues using positive reinforcement. This is the horse that was on the first slide, and this horse was started right from scratch using positive reinforcement, the first horse that I did that completely. The idea of motivating our horses by offering pleasant consequences, I think, generally appears to resonate with people who thrive on praise for getting things right. That's probably me. Rather than those who are motivated by pressure to get the thing done, which is probably more my husband. But I think it's important that we don't confuse the motivations of horses with those of humans. And perhaps, more importantly, we shouldn't assume that we have the right to pressure a horse to perform for us without having any say in the matter. Precision is another reason to use positive reinforcement, as it allows us to pinpoint and reward specific behaviours when they happen. And that helps the horse to clearly understand us. This clarity makes it easier to shape complex behaviours over time, reinforcing each small step toward the final goal. The more precise we are with our reinforcement, the clearer the communication becomes, allowing us to build behaviour intentionally and effectively. This not only speeds up learning, but it also strengthens the horse's confidence and engagement in the process. For example, if we want to improve a canter transition, we can mark and reinforce the exact moment the horse lifts into canter, not 3 seconds later, the exact moment that the brain connects with the body and offers canter. Makes it clear which movement we're after, and we can put great cues on them. After time, the precision helps refine that transition, creating a smooth, balanced response to our cues and aids. Horses tend to offer more behaviour when they're motivated by an outcome that they desire, simply because it's more enjoyable for them. When training is fun and rewarding, horses are more likely to engage and try out different behaviours. That's when the fun starts. The process becomes something they look forward to rather than just a means to avoid something uncomfortable. This allows for greater creativity and flexibility in our training as the horse becomes an active participant in the process. And of course, positive reinforcement appeals to the inner training geek in some of us. It's a method that encourages us to observe and experiment and fine-tune every detail of our training. For those who love understanding the science behind behaviour and the art of shaping it, positive reinforcement provides endless opportunities for exploration. And it's so satisfying to see how small adjustments in timing or reinforcement can make a huge difference in a horse's response. And for trainers who enjoy problem solving, it's an approach that keeps you constantly on your toes, learning and improving. Understanding how positive reinforcement works actually leads you to be a lot better in your application of negative reinforcement, if that's the way you usually train. Before we can even get in the saddle, we can use positive reinforcement or well-applied non-escalating negative reinforcement to make each step smoother and more enjoyable for horse and human. Husbandry becomes easier when the horse willingly participates in their routine care rather than simply tolerating it. You may recall a few webinars back, Babs and Sam's World Horse Welfare webinar on cooperative care. Tacking up can be a positive experience with the horse learning to stand calmly and even engage with the process. Groundwork allows us to begin the process before we're on board, and the same learning theory applies throughout. At the mounting block, reinforcing stillness and relaxation leads to a horse that chooses to stand rather than feeling restrained. By reinforcing the right responses at every stage, we can build confidence ready for riding. The process can begin before we add tack to the process. If we then add tack and the process begins to fail, we're guided to look at the comfort of the tack and the emotional connections with wearing tack, for instance. In this short video, you're going to see what I love to train at the mounting block, which is 4 feet keeping still. I don't need anything fancy. I don't need the horse to shuffle towards me. I don't need them to trot across the arena. Of course, those are lovely videos, but this is so achievable for people. And I'm just shaping what will become me climbing up onto that mounting block and getting onto the horse. I'm often asked about horses that can't, in rabbit ears, be trained with food, or that the person that's training can't carry food. Well, we have the lovely Prince here, for whom food right under his nose, very close to him, can be a little bit worrying. So this is a solution if you have a horse that you feel that you really can't do too much. So again, we're practicing the mounting block, but instead of carrying food and offering it from the hand to the mouth, which is the way most people consider using clicker training, positive reinforcement, we can provide that in a bucket for him. And it doesn't end there. Positive reinforcement can continue to shape how the horse learns and performs. Simple behaviours like a balanced halt or a soft bend can be taught and refined more clearly using positive reinforcement. Whenever I'm stuck and I can't think of how I'm going to tell somebody to change the behaviour of a horse, I'm never thinking down a negative reinforcement route. It's always positive reinforcement because you have that creativity. These individual behaviours that we might train can be linked as sequences, and reinforcement gradually reduce, which is the other big question. But heads up, you don't need to click and feed every transition forever. As training progresses, entire dressage tests, jump courses or archery runs can be built using the same principles. I can only scratch the surface in this webinar, but the intricacies of training with an eye to learning theory means we can construct understandable patterns that the horse can feel confident in. But learning to use things like props, poles, blocks to explain behaviour isn't just for beginners. Don't think that by using them, you're going backwards. It's definitely a skill that we can all benefit from, and our horses in particular can. In this video, I'm training a discrete behaviour. That's to say, one tiny unit of behaviour. We're going from a walk to trot transition. And one of the questions, as I say, that I'm asked a lot is, won't the stopping after the click result in him only wanting to trot one step? Or won't I always be clicking every time he trots in future? Well, if we only click after the first step forever, yes, of course, we might begin to shape that behaviour that just does that. But no, we begin to produce that behaviour, to mould it, shape it, so the horse has a clear understanding of what the behaviour evolves into. But to begin with, as in this video, once his brain links that first moment of trot with the consequence that my clicker marks, we can then go into shaping longer periods. So I hardly trotted. It was the moment that he moved his body together to say, yes, I think I can trot. I can mark it with a click followed by food, but I'm not going to be doing it forever. Here, Reg and I are working on a sequence of behaviours that have been taught as those single discrete elements that we just saw. In this case, halt, step back, walk on. This is how we build behaviour. And finally, at the end of the sequence, I click, mark, and feed. So we don't have to be clicking or marking every single behaviour that we see forever. It evolves into a beautiful process. In this clip, I'm marking after the rein back. The poles help channel him into a straighter position in the trot and the trot-halt transition. The trot is light and enthusiastic because Reggie knows that ahead is the reinforcement. That motivation, that carrot is ahead. And again, he's actually trotted a whole circuit round to come back into the poles. But where do I click? Right at the end. In this short series of clips, Reggie is taking a sideways step. We've strategically placed mats on the ground that mean something to him. He's learnt to stand on mats. And so I stand ahead and help him by pointing in the right direction for movement. But notice how I gradually reduce my assistance, because if I didn't, I become part of the cue or the aid for this behaviour.
Good
That click right on the moment that his hoof hits the mat.
One more and then we'll go.
And you see me now, I'm pretty much out of the picture. I'm still in the picture slightly, but I'm not pointing, and I've really reduced my behaviour. And so here's the final result, and Reggie sidestepping across a pole with cues that were taught using positive reinforcement. And a huge thanks to Becky Bayliss at Little Green Stables, who not only believes everything that I suggest that we train and wholeheartedly goes along with it, but lets me use video of her horses. And in my final clip for you in this webinar, we will return to Prince. Here, he works with a sequence of walk, halt over a pole, stand on a mat, click and reinforce. And then we go into the alternative of feeding him in the bucket at the end. So you can see him finishing his last reinforcer here in the bucket. And Becky verbally cues him to woo and verbally cues him to walk on. He's just learning to stand on the mat,
Really
so
nice. Really
we
nice.
use that occasional click and feed to the mouth for those things. It's not too worrying for him just to have the odd one. And then she comes and walks around the cone.
Good. Weight into that right leg. Good girl.
And then cues him to go to the bucket. So the bucket replaces the click. The bucket is the cue for bucket is the reinforcer for him in that situation. So to finish, I'll go through a few of my take homes. I'm sure with all that experience of you attending tonight, you're going to have some other things that you might like to mention in the Q&A as well. But to finish, here's just a few of mine. Remember that learning theory underpins everything we do in training. We don't have any choice in that. It's learning theory is a thing. It's not just a theory, it's a science. And a few key principles can help ensure your success in your riding communication. Timing matters. Reinforcement must happen. Well, the reinforcement doesn't happen to immediately to have to happen immediately for the horse to connect it, but the click has to happen at the right place. Reinforcement can be delayed by processes as you get better at it. Clarity is essential, and your cues, whether you're using negative or positive reinforcement, clarity is essential. So use cues that can be distinct. If you use very similar sounding words for your cues for lunging, then your horse is possibly going to get mixed up, as might you be. And remember that you need to turn up as the same trainer every time. Consistency builds reliability between you and your horse. If sometimes you're turning up and offering punishment to your horse, sometimes you're using positive reinforcement with food or scratches, then your horse is going to be very confused. Motivation drives learning. We've learned that. We know that, whether we're using positive or negative reinforcement. The horse needs a reason to respond, just like us. And finally, behaviour must be built carefully. It's no good going in and thinking, oh, just because I can put something really nice on this behaviour doesn't mean that you can train in big lumps of difficult things to do. No, break it down, get savvy, get smart about how you piece behaviours together. And finally, remember that you have to highlight that desired behavior. You really have to, and that's by using a clicker or something like a bucket cue to go to the bucket. And remember to find yourself a trainer who understands these principles if they're new to you. Do not just go out and train with food tomorrow if you've never tried it before. Honestly, it's worth digging into the science a little bit more to find out. You can find courses with me, of course, at understandhorses.com. And I've got several there that you can just pluck off the shelf and take in at your own leisure. But I also have coming up in the next few weeks my Horse Trainer Foundation Certificate, which is a certificate for trainers if you're a professional trainer or you want to be and use positive reinforcement and understand learning theory, then that would be the course for you. It's sold out this year, but it will run again next year. And Justine and I will be presenting at Understand Horses Live again this year on the 9th and 10th of August at NTU. We are joining an amazing lineup of presenters for 2 days of lectures, it's demos, training workshops, all on horse behaviour, physiology, training and welfare. And there are early bird tickets already on sale, and a massive thanks to World Horse Welfare for their support of this event. Honestly, you get up close with the presenters. It's a really great event. I can't recommend it highly enough. Thank you very much. Sorry that was such a whirlwind rush through some learning theory in terms of riding, but I hope we've got some great Q&As that we can tease some more out of. But thank you for your being here tonight.
Trudi, thank you so much. Wow. I mean, we've got so many questions coming in already, which is brilliant. So thank you for all your questions. The first one's actually for me, which is not the rule at all, but they're happy to take on all the questions. And remember, on the Zoom, you can upvote those questions. So if there's a question there that you already like, then please do. And Trudi, lots and lots of thank you messages coming through already. That was absolutely brilliant. So now we're going to move into the Q&A, and that's where I'm delighted to be able to introduce Justine. And let me just bring the slide back. So Justine, like Trudi, is certified with the International Association of Animal Behaviour Consultants and is also registered with the accredited animal behaviourist, as an accredited animal behaviourist with the Animal Behaviour and Training Council. And I think what a question I might ask in a second, it's so important that people do have proper qualifications in every facet of people who are engaged in our horses, and that's so important, especially within the world of equine behaviour too. And of course, as you've heard from Trudi, Justine is also a founder of Understand Horses, a wonderful online education platform, and obviously Understand Horses Live in August, which we're delighted to be involved with. It's such a good event. So, and I think Basil's already given us the link for further details about that. And a quirky fact that you might actually, if you were listening the last time Justine joined us, it's the same one, but it's the same one because it's so good. But her dad carried out the post-mortem on the mummy of Tutankhamun. So she spent some time in Egypt as a child when he worked there. Wow, that's dealing in history in the most amazing way. So Justine, it's great that you are joining us and Trudi and myself on the discussion panel. Well, I'm just here to ask the questions and the two of you. And just Trudi's given us so much to think about, and she's touched on this already. But can you just explain why the cues and aids we used with our horses have to be so clear, and why the timing of the reinforcement is so important for the horse to understand what we're asking them?
Firstly, thank you so much for having me, Rowley. Yeah, and a brilliant question. And to be honest, Trudi's done a really, really good job of answering that question already. But I was just going to say that to reinforce that, horses learn through association. So they connect an aid or a cue with the outcome based on what immediately follows it. So if the cues and the reinforcers are unclear or inconsistent, the horse might struggle to understand what's being asked, leading to confusion or even frustration. So if we're thinking about negative reinforcement, so that's pressure release, we need to release pressure at the right moment so that the horse can understand the correct response. When I'm talking to my clients about this, to try and make this clear, I would give them an example of talking about maybe if they go and have a dance lesson. It's really interesting because we don't tend to use pressure release with another human. But let's say you're being taught a new dance move and your instructor has got hold of your arms and they're going to teach you a new step. So they would apply pressure to guide your movement, let's say to move you backwards. And so they're going to guide you backwards by putting pressure on you to move you back. Now, if you only needed to move back one step, they should release that pressure at that time so that you know when you've performed the right behavior. But if they continue to keep pushing you backwards past the point of the behavior that they wanted, you wouldn't be able to understand what you were being asked. You might get confused or you might resist. So it's really important, if we think about negative reinforcement, that we release pressure at exactly at the right time. So clear release is going to be easier for the horse to learn, and a delayed or an inconsistent release could lead to confusion. Similarly, if we're thinking about positive reinforcement, if you were teaching a child to tie their shoes for the first time, if every time they created a loop to start with, if you said good or praised them at that point, and then when they tied the laces around each other and you said good at that point, they know exactly what you're asking them. So it's really important that the feedback is relevant as far as the timing is concerned to the behavior that they're performing. If we have delayed reinforcement, the horse actually might associate another behavior with the reinforcer. So you might get the wrong behavior.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Justine. That was outstanding. Trudi, just what are some of the common misconceptions you come across regarding positive reinforcement for ridden training?
Well, there are many, but I think one of the things that really often I hear people say is that they want their horse to do it because they love doing it rather than doing it for food. This idea, this myth that it's bribery. And I think if we think about how we all work because we would like something for what we do, that motivation that I spoke about. So I think the myth there for me of it being bribery, well, if we think going to work and getting paid for it is bribery, then yeah, we're all being bribed all the time. So that's one of the big ones. I think the other one is that you have to click all the time forever. And I think this myth is unfortunately supported by a lot of videos that you might see online where people are doing lots of lovely behaviors, but they tend to share this stuff when they're all excited at the beginning. And we rarely see people take it all the way through. You know, the horse that I showed a lot of photographs of my own and some of my videos, I took him right from the start using predominantly positive reinforcement based training. And at the end, I would do 10, 15 minutes sometimes without stopping for reinforcement. So you don't have to keep stopping. That's one of the biggest myths, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you. Justine, this is an obvious question to answer, but I think understanding more about it is so important. But how important is it for riders and coaches to understand the subtle no's that the horses can give us and those signs of frustration when training our horses, whether on the ground or when ridden?
That's such a good question. I think it's important for us to recognize that horses can only really tell us how they're feeling via their behavior or their body language. So they're going to communicate their fear or their discomfort or their confusion via initially subtle body language signals before so let's say if they're ignored or they're missed, then they might need to resort to bigger and perhaps more dangerous behaviors like napping or bucking or rearing. So it's really important for us to recognize those early warning signs so that we can adjust our approach and improve the horse's confidence and their learning experience. But I just wanted to mention, I think it would be useful to talk about a few of those early warning signs, and that could be hesitation, or it could be taking a little bit longer to respond to a cue or an aid, or a reluctance to move forward. If you're on the ground, it's very useful to have somebody on the ground watching your horse in case you can't see it. I would be looking for things like tension in the face, a tense mouth, change in the shape of the eye from being very round and soft, which we would see when they're relaxed, to triangular, or perhaps seeing the whites of the eyes, tail swishing or clamping, even an increase in spooky behaviours. I haven't really spoken about frustration, and I think Trudi mentioned a bit of it. So she spoke about extinction in positive reinforcement training. So that would be when an owner is kind of withholding food because they're perhaps not getting the right behavior. And so we might see horses mugging and mouthing jackets or sleeves, or even pawing at the ground or putting their ears back because they're frustrated, because they're expecting the food and they're not getting it. Also, we might see them trying to walk ahead of the handler if you're leading them. So ignoring those signals could lead to the horse becoming stressed, not having a positive experience when training, or reduced willingness, I was going to say, to work.
Brilliant.
Could I just add really briefly on the end of that, Rowley? The horse Prince in some of the videos, one day he just didn't want to do it. He didn't want to move off a bucket and go anywhere else. He didn't offer us any behaviour. And it took us a few weeks to get to the bottom of it. He blew the most enormous abscess through his coronet band. And so clearly that had been building up for weeks. And as soon as it had gone and it is healed, he's like back to, you know, Prince, the keen pony, wants to do things. So if your horse isn't willing, don't let anybody tell you there's nothing. You know, your vet casting their eye over your horse when it's having its annual jabs is not telling you your horse is okay. You really can dig down into these things. And there's so often, I'm rarely wrong that there's something going on underneath the surface. And I know Justine is the same with that.
You're rarely wrong. That's the headline of tonight.
Oh, yeah, sorry, only on the unwillingness. I'm often
no,
wrong. I'll get my husband for you, Rowley. He'll tell you that's definitely not true.
Trudi, where can, if we want to find out more about information about training horses using positive reinforcement, especially if we're new to it, the whole concept, where's best to look?
Well, I always still send people back to the Karen Pryor book, Don't Shoot the Dog. It's a cheap book. It's very easy. It's not full of glossy pictures. Yes, it has dog in the title, but it talks about the principles of using positive reinforcement. And I think it's either it just appeals to you and you think, oh, that sparks something in me, or it doesn't. And I think it's a really, really good book to start with. And of course, you could tune into Lead a Horse to Water, which is my equine training and behaviour podcast, where I talk about it a lot.
Brilliant. And look at that. Basil even put a link to it on an online shopping platform that many might be. Brilliant. Listen, there are so many questions, so let's dive into them. The first one actually is for me, and it's a question around World Horse Welfare's support for the responsible involvement of horses in sport. And so I won't talk about that because I'll just direct people to our website where there's lots of information. So Basil, if you wouldn't mind putting a link into that. But nevertheless, Elena has asked, and shall I go to Justine? There is obviously evidence of positive punishment within competition and sport in the sporting world, but it's not just that, it's in the leisure world as well. What is your experience, Justine, of how open, because I think Elena's talking about actually there's real resistance to actually adopting ethical training methods within the horse sport world. What is your experience with that?
That's such an interesting question. Okay, so my day job is going to help horse owners that have behaviour problems, whose horses have behaviour problems. And interestingly, I do see a lot of professional riders or competition riders that will use traditional methods Some of them do very well. Some of them, their horses might struggle with the amount of pressure that's used or what the horse is asked to do. But I have had extremely good experiences where I have, let's say, if a horse is reluctant to load, that I've suggested using positive reinforcement because they've used escalating pressure previously, which has led to the horse having really negative experiences about the loading process and usually becoming more scared. And if they, I was going to say, the majority of the people I see are quite happy to try that and take that on and use it very successfully. I have a feeling that in a lot of cases, this is about a lack of awareness.
Yeah.
I don't think in all cases. I think in some cases there might be a feeling of we've always done it this way and it's worked, so we're going to continue. But a lot of people are really open to trying new methods, and I think this is just about raising awareness.
Absolutely, and I think there are even some of the top riders, well, actually some of the top riders who do very much use ethical training methods. But I think your point there about awareness is so relevant. Trudi, is there anything you want to add off the back of that?
I think I'll just add really what Justine said already, which is change. Change is so hard. If somebody pushes you, you come up against it. It's really hard. Normally people, as Justine say, when they need help, they're prepared to do anything because everyone loves their horse. No, I don't know people who do horses because they don't love them. It's because we love them that we want to do the best. But you know, when we're pressured into change, it can feel uncomfortable. So it's a difficult one, but thanks for such a great question to you. Thanks.
No, thank you, Elena, for that.
Yeah, and she does, I know, support very much progress, and I love that about her. So keep demanding progress, Eleanor.
Absolutely, no, couldn't agree more. And just on that, in terms of progress and profile, it's just wonderful that today's webinar is truly international. And in addition to from all over the UK, the four countries in the UK and Ireland, we got across in the Americas, across New York, Washington and Wisconsin state, Costa Rica, Canada, Australia, and then across Europe, Denmark, Israel, Croatia, Romania and Greece. And I love the message from Jackie Floyd in Greece. She says, I'm going to miss you guys. Well, we're going to miss you too, Jackie, but we'll be back in November. So the next question is to Trudi. Obviously, there's an overlap with what a lot of people you've mentioned, but the two of you have mentioned already. But Rosie has asked, how do you mitigate or prevent frustration using positive reinforcement?
Well, I would say that there is no one horse that is the same in anything that we do. We know that, obviously, but the way we can do it is by starting correctly in the beginning. That's why I think, as I ended, I said, don't go out and start training with food tomorrow without some support, without knowing a little bit more about what you're doing. It's far easier to start the right way by introducing the click and what follows, or your whatever, if you want to use a word instead of a click. It's much better to do it right in the first place than to unpick when it goes wrong. So yeah, it's very hard if horses are frustrated around food, but you saw what I did with Prince there with the bucket. So I could, to begin with, I could throw the food into the bucket for Prince. His rider didn't have to. And then she's become absolutely excellent at throwing the food in from the saddle. And it is an awful lot easier actually when you're riding. The problems generally arise when you're on the ground and the food bag is close to the horse. It's a bit of a drum that I've banged for many years, Rowley, about how we deliver food. And that is what the key is. The rest is dead easy, but you have to get that bit right at the beginning. So yeah, I urge caution for people who haven't yet started. Don't rush out with all your food on you before you've had a good idea about how that process is going to develop for you and your horse.
Absolutely, I love that message at the end of your slides. Build behaviour carefully. You know, this is not something that we can rush. Take it steady. Brilliant. Justine, there's a question on YouTube. When does positive reinforcement become negative reinforcement? I used feeding my mare in the trailer to help her get over a scare. It did solve the problem.
Okay, that's quite a strange question to unpick. I don't, I don't think positive reinforcement wouldn't become negative reinforcement. They are two entirely separate things. So negative reinforcement is the release of pressure. So an aversive stimulus would have been applied, and it's the removal of that. Positive reinforcement is reinforcing through rewarding a specific behavior, telling the animal what you want them to do, basically, praising them when they do the right thing. And so that could be by giving food or giving them a scratch on the withers. So they're two entirely separate things.
Yeah, I suppose just thinking about it completely logically in a wrong way, negative reinforcement is the release of pressure. It might be that positive reinforcement is actually the application of pressure, and you could see that which clearly isn't. But do you see what
I see what you mean.
You see that? So I think it is that understanding to actually recognise that they sound like that they could just be the opposite of one action, but that's not the case at all, is it?
Yes. One is release release of pressure. The other is the application of a reward. Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Yes,
probably just to add to that as well, that what was probably happening in that case was a bit of counter conditioning. The horse goes in the trailer, you give it some food, you're changing the way the horse feels about that situation. So neither positive nor negative reinforcement technically, although, as I say, it's a bit soupy, and all sorts of things can be going on in the brain at the same time.
A bit soupy. I love it. Trudi, Elke has, in the examples, I see combined reinforcement. Is it ever possible to exclude negative reinforcement if we want to sit on a horse, have a bridle or neck ring, or use our weight?
I think it's difficult to avoid it. Again, it comes down to that bowl of soup. Now, I intentionally try and train most things by positive reinforcement, but if I walk away from the horse during the session and give it a bit of time to cool down a bit, me moving myself away could technically be reducing the pressure on that horse. I would say that when I teach a cue to a horse, I'm teaching it through positive reinforcement. So that might be that I've asked the horse to target my hand first, and we get the action of the horse moving their head, and then I would transfer that to a cue on the rein. So that's a whole different thing to mixed reinforcement. So when we look at mixed reinforcement, that would be pull on the rein, horse does what you want them to do, which is move their head, you click reinforce. That's not something, blended is not for me, and people do use it, but I find it's just the layering is more confusing for a lot of people and for the horse as well. But it is a method that some people use.
Brilliant. Thank you, Trudi. Justine, Pam's asked, I follow a training method of positive reinforcements as being discussed, but without the clicker. What are the benefits of using a clicker too? Would it help to stop mugging, as just mentioned?
Oh, that's a really good question. The clicker is combined with a food reward, so that actually the animal just learns that the click means that food is on the way. And a really good example of this would have been training orca to, if they jump through a hoop, the trainer would click at the time that they jumped through the hoop, so that then they would know that they could swim back and get the food, because you couldn't feed an orca as they're jumping through a hoop, as it were. What's really, really useful about the clicker, or you can use any other marker, you could say good. I have owners that will say X, for example, is that it gives a really clear indicator to the horse that that is the behavior that you're looking for. So it marks the behavior. Doing that alone is not going to get rid of the mugging behavior. As Trudi said, that is going to be all about how you would set up using food. Like Trudi, I recommend that owners have very clear rules about using food in training. And that could be, as Trudi said, using a bucket, or using a bum bag only for food. There are lots of owners that will give food rewards out of a pocket. So then the horse will smell food in their pocket and think, that food is available all the time. So you need to set up the situation so that the horse knows when food is available and when food is not available. And the easiest way to do that is either to have a bum bag that you take on and off when you're training, or, as Trudi says, to drop it into a bucket.
Brilliant. Thank you, Justine. Trudi, Anne's asked, please would you discuss your antipathy to traditional methods? I agree that there are countless examples of poorly applied negative reinforcement. However, isn't it the case that well-applied negative reinforcement is easily understood by the horse and need not cause stress?
I think that is some people's thought process, and I don't have a problem with negative reinforcement if people are doing that. I just wouldn't necessarily choose to be involved with that myself. I find if I'm stuck, if I come up against something that I don't know how to solve, it's obvious to take positive reinforcement, because I can encourage a behavior, I can change the horse's behavior through a process of creativity. Whereas if I'm using negative reinforcement, I've got to push harder or kick harder. So yes, I quite agree with Anne. If every horse did everything from finger light feather cues, I probably wouldn't even have looked outside negative reinforcement. But the fact that that is not usually the case, yeah, leads me to look more towards positive reinforcement.
Brilliant. Thank you, Trudi. Listen, loads of questions. Please do remember you can upvote them and it will get them up the top of the vote. But we've only got a limited time, so please do upvote those questions and we'll get to certainly the most popular ones. Justine, Stacey's asked, does positive reinforcement make a calmer horse than a traditionally trained one?
Oh, good question. Okay. I think this is more a question of negative reinforcement. Using negative reinforcement to train horses and using positive reinforcement to train horses can both be done badly. So calmness. We can have horses that have been poorly trained with food that can be very over-aroused about food. And it is really worth us considering that if a horse isn't fed appropriately, the other 23 hours of the day, that they might get over-aroused or muggy about food. So just using positive reinforcement doesn't mean that your horse is going to be calmer. But we do have research that has shown that horses learn faster using positive reinforcement. They will remember the task for longer, and they are more interested in interacting with the owner. So there are benefits. I wouldn't say necessarily that the horse is going to be calmer. Let me put it that way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Trudi, Jackie's asked, do you have some best practices for using positive reinforcement when attempting to counter condition a negative or traumatic past experience?
Oh gosh, now we could be here for 3 more webinars just talking about that one. It's a great question. I'm going to say, because of the sort of general nature of the conversation, and I haven't taken a behavioural history, that for me, I want to adjust the horse's lifestyle first before I think about adding positive reinforcement to anything. But in terms of counter conditioning, yes, counter conditioning with food, you know, just in the basic premise of that is a great way to do things, and I would consider doing that. But if a horse is still struggling from that negative trauma in its past, then there are a few things that I'd like to do first. I do something that a lot of behavior consultants do called slow learning. Other people call it other things, but where the horse can amble around between different novel areas of training with food, hidden and unusual surfaces, maybe a bucket of water with apple bobbing and things like that, to sort of build confidence in training and to change their opinion of things. So yeah, there are so many things. I'd love to talk more about that, and I'll make a note. I'll try and remember that question, and I will do a podcast on it, I promise.
There you go. Look, output already. Absolutely love it. Justine, Georgia's asked, can you use positive and negative reinforcement can using positive and negative reinforcement together be conflicting? For example, I'm asking for a backup by using pressure and then rewarding with food.
Um, I think, again, this is going to be how it's applied. It's, again, I think Trudy's mentioned this previously. That's not something necessarily I would do. Now I know that some academics have called this combined reinforcement. I would choose to use positive reinforcement or potentially negative reinforcement. Rowley, can you repeat the question again? I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. Let me go back to it. I've dismissed it now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. It was about using them together. Is using positive and negative reinforcement together conflicting? And then she gave an example of asking for a backup by using pressure and then rewarding with food.
Not necessarily. Do you know what? I'm gonna defer to Trudy on that one. What would you say, Trudy?
I was going to say, Justine, get off the fence. No, it's hard because there are well-respected people in our equine community who believe strongly in one thing and some that believe in another. I would say that Justine and I feel that there are clearer ways by just using one or the other. Now, there is a way sometimes where positive and negative might be used. So I might click and feed the horse for something I like, and then we might leave the thing that they don't like, or I might move away and take the pressure. That reduces pressure. So I would be adding negative reinforcement after positive. So there are sort of all sorts of strands.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Some of which we would feel more comfortable using and some less. But there is this whole sea of different training. And I think people select what fits with their own ethics. But it's a great question and one we're asked a lot.
But it comes back to your soup analogy, doesn't it? And so it's really dangerous to, would it be, I think it's very dangerous to say this is right, that's wrong. Clearly there are things that are right, but there is, and it's obviously you say it's how we individually we work best. Find your right trainer, as you said.
Absolutely, and I'm very pragmatic. So a lot of people come to me for behaviour cases, and they didn't sign up for clicker training. So I try and find ways that suit them. So yeah, we need to be, all of us, and that's the way we get better for horses.
Sorry, Rowley, I was going to add to that. If somebody is consistently using negative reinforcement with their horse, I will go and see these owners all the time. And I think it's really important to add, you don't have to change all of your training over to use positive reinforcement. You can use positive reinforcement for one aspect of what you're doing. And I know that we spoke previously about competition riders. I know that there's a couple of dressage riders and show jumpers in the United States that actually will use positive reinforcement, and they'll use marker or clicker training to get a more precise PF. So, but they will still use traditional negative reinforcement. So you can add positive reinforcement to what you're doing in traditional training.
Brilliant. Thank you, Justine. Andrea has asked Trudy, she sees on your site that you mentioned transitioning horses to bitless bridles. Do you personally believe that is better for horses?
It's my preference, yes, every time. And the horses that you saw in all of the videos and photographs tonight were bitless. That's my choice. I do train people who use bits because I think if we don't reach out and all join together, we're never going to get anywhere. So I really think we need to be, together in this rather than separating ourselves into these little walled areas. But yeah, I love bitless, but I don't think just chucking away your bit and putting on a bitless bridle is the answer. You still got to train it. You've still got to teach your horse how to flex. You still need to teach that range of cues and aids.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Justine, Helen's asked, can I ask what cues you teach for these movements? They are lovely and light. Are they all verbal cues only? Obviously, I'm not quite sure which example.
I've got a feeling that she might have been asking Trudy because of Trudy's films.
Yes,
maybe
so that's very sensible.
Trudy. Yeah.
Trudy, I mean, and how much the verbal cues against, light of tactile cues?
Yeah, well, it makes sense if you're going to ride to use verbal cues in your groundwork so that when you get on board, you've got something that works. Obviously, the context changes a little and your horse is thinking, hang on a minute, she's sat on me now. Does it mean the same thing? But it does join up. The dots do join up without a doubt. So I will tend to use verbal cues for groundwork so that they will transfer to the ridden work. If you're not going to ride, then you could use directional cues, pointing. You might even teach tactile cues on the rope, you know, or reins, whatever. So for some of my clients, they will choose to move to tactile cues from voice cues, but it's really nice to have two cues that mean the same thing. I don't want, you know, that to be confusing, but it's fine to have walk on mean walk on, and a light tactile leg cue, which you've taught through positive reinforcement. It's great to have both, because if I was training something that required the horse to do something else, like when I start to bring in bend and shoulders coming off the track to do a shoulder in, then I need to be able to tell my horse to keep moving, because often they'll go, oh, I can't do any of this altogether. And so then I could say walk on at the same time as my tactile cues may be saying, now let's move the shoulder off the track. So, you know, it's quite handy having the two as well. So that's just my thought on cues.
Brilliant. Thank you. Michelle's asked Justine, how do we help a horse afraid of a rider after an accident with positive reinforcement?
Okay, so afraid of the rider. So I would start by recommending that the rider has a break from riding and starts to have relaxed, positive experiences with the horse. And then I think it's important, if we're thinking that if a horse has had an accident, and I'm assuming we're talking about an accident riding, that actually I would what's called counter condition. So that really means to retrain, to unlearn the fear response, to as many of the stimuli that are involved in riding as possible. So I would actually counter condition tack and the presence of the rider, and I would pretty much go back to square one. Doesn't need to take a long period of time, but I would pair the arrival of the saddle with food, the numbness sitting on the horse's back with food, very gradually increase each step, and then have the rider stand on the mounting block, use food, put their foot in the stirrup, use food. You get the idea. So, but what's really, really important is, as we mentioned before, to look at the early warning signs of the horse to make sure that we're not pushing them too much. We've got to stay under their emotional threshold.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Justine. I think we've only got time for a couple more questions. Thank you so much to everyone for these questions. They're great. Trudi, Lucy's asked, is this a system you can or should use right through to top level competition or competing? How do you positively reinforce a horse after a cross country round? Or does this method and conventional ways of riding, such as rewarding with patting, the voice, loosening of the girth at the finish, eventually converge?
Great question. And I really want a top level person to sort of have a look around and think what they might be able to do with this. And as we've said already, just trying some of the little add-ons. But yes, you could do a whole cross-country course. Of course, you would only start by jumping a cross pole, just as you would in the arena in any training. You would jump one jump, reinforce the horse after that. You would jump 2 jumps. You would jump 3 jumps. You would take that out on the cross-country course. The same way we build any training. Nobody went and jumped a whole cross-country round like from scratch. So you would build the training in the same way. The reinforcement, we call it chaining or sequencing. And so you gradually add those behaviors one after the other. Have you seen a dog go around an agility course? I would guess there's a 99% chance that dog's been trained using positive reinforcement, and they don't stop after every obstacle on the agility course. Same for horses. So absolutely, you can do that. Just quickly, patting. Horses don't see patting as reinforcing. If you can prove otherwise, then absolutely, because it's just the science. If you get more behaviour, it's reinforcing. So generally speaking, patting or loosening the girth aren't going to help your horse do more of that later. They're nice things to do. They're brilliant things to do. Not the patting. I'd rather scratch. Good old scratch on the withers.
Scratch, not pat. That's the way forward, isn't it? And Eleanor's asked Justine, final question, and it's certainly not a stupid question, but can you do clicker training or positive reinforcement with scratches rather than food?
Absolutely. And that's a great thing to do. I was just going to say, research has shown that we can actually lower the heart rate of a horse by scratching at the withers in the same way that they would do if they groomed each other. So we can have a calming influence of them on them. And that scratching of the withers is also a really important social bonding behavior between horses, so it can improve our relationship with our horse. Brilliant thing to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Listen, we've got through just over half the questions, and I'm so sorry we haven't been able to get through the more, but we've had such a wealth of information from both Justine and Trudi. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you. The amount, the love that's come through on the chat here is extraordinary and so well deserved. And we're hugely grateful to both of you. And before I let you go, we have proverbially covered a lot of ground. What would your take-home message be? And Justine, could I come to you first?
Yes, I know at the moment there's an enormous amount of concern about the welfare of horses in sport. I think one of the best things that we could do is actually consider how they learn and how we train them. And so I think it's our responsibility, really, to start looking at learning theory and considering how we train our horses.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Trudi?
Yeah, well, for me, I think the take home should be, if you can't see how this can work for you, get along to somebody and see it in action. Just think how you could apply a tiny bit of it for you, even if it's fun, even if it's just a little bit of cognitive enrichment for your horse, touching a target, which is not my main thing, but if that's all you can do, just see how clever your horse is, and it will light your fire, I hope. And can I just say very quickly, I have been reading chat. Thank you. There's some just brilliant thoughts coming from people, and it makes me think that we're all a lot closer than we might sometimes think. So thank you for all that.
Well, Trudi, thank you. And Basil's put in the link there to equine learning theory or horse learning theory and resources on the World Horse Welfare website. So, and I think, Trudi, you made such an important point about, respecting each other and not, there are different ways of doing things, and there's clearly wrong ways of doing things as well, but there's got to be so much respect in this, and I think that's such an important point. But I think the key messages for me around building behaviour carefully, I thought that was such a strong message, and the TCC of timing, consistency, and clarity. And I think so. Thank you to you both for bringing such clarity to what is a very soupy topic. But just remember, this is the end of the current series of World Horse Welfare Wednesday webinars. We've certainly gone out on a high this series. We will be returning in November. Please email us on education@worldhorsewelfare.org and with any topics you'd like us to cover in the next series. And remember, this is one of 68 webinars that's on our YouTube education channel. So please, if you look at one every 2.5 days, I reckon between now and November, we'll get to November. So there you go. There's your homework. And of course, members understand horses, the resource there, and also understand horses live in August. Thank you so much to everyone. I am energized by that. I hope you are too. And we'll look forward to seeing you in November.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Roly.
Yeah, thank you, Roly, and everyone behind the scenes.
Absolutely.